is it?" she asked the taxi driver. "6 Shelby Road, Lullaby. This is it." Emily hesitated, then paid him and got out. The air outside was tomato sweet and hickory smoked, all at once delicious and strange. It automatically made her touch her tongue to her lips. It was dusk, but the street lights weren't on yet. She was taken aback by how quiet everything was. It suddenly made her head feel light. No street sounds, no kids playing, no music or television. There was your age. His smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. He dropped his hand, then looked around awkwardly. Where are your suitcases? I left them on the porch. There was a short silence. Neither of them had known the other existed until recently. How could they have run out of things to say already? There was so much she wanted to know. Well, he finally said, you can do what you want upstairs. It's all yours. I can't get up there anymore. Arthritis in my hips and knees. This is my room now. He pointed to the accordion door. You can choose any room you want, but your mother's old room was the last one on the right. Tell me what the wallpaper looks like when you walk in. I'd like it to know. Thank you, I will, she said as she turned and walked away from her. Toward the kitchen, his steps loud in his wondrously large shoes. Emily watched him go, confused. That was it. She went to the porch and dragged her bags in. Upstairs, she found a long hallway that smelled woolly and tight. There were 6 doors. She walked down the hall, the scraping of her duffel bag magnified in the hardwood silence. Once she reached the last door on the right, she dropped her duffel bag and reached to the inside wall for the light switch. The first thing she noticed when the light popped on was that the wallpaper had rows and rows of tiny lilacs on it. Like scratch and sniff paper, and the room actually smelled a little like lilacs. There was a 4-poster bed against the wall, the torn, gauzy remnants of what had once been a canopy and now hanging off the posts like maypoles. There was a white trunk at the foot of the bed. The name Dulcie, Emily's mother's name, was carved in it in swirly letters. As she walked by it, she ran her hand over the top of the trunk, and her fingertips came away with puffs of dust. Underneath the age, like looking through a layer of ice, there was a distinct impression of privilege in this room. It made no sense. This room looked nothing like her mother. She opened the set of French doors and stepped out onto the balcony. Crunching into dried oak leaves that were ankle deep. Everything had felt so precarious since her mother's death, like she was walking on a bridge made of paper. When she left Boston, it had been with a sense of hope, like coming here was going to make everything okay. She'd actually been comforted by the thought of falling back into a cradle of her mother's youth, of bonding with the grandfather she hadn't known she had. Instead, the lonely strangeness of this place mocked her. This didn't feel like home. She reached to touch her charm bracelet for comfort, but felt only bare skin. She lifted her wrist, startled. The bracelet was gone. She looked around, then looked down, then around. She frantically kicked the leaves on the balcony, trying to find it. She rushed back into the room and dragged her bags in, thinking maybe the bracelet had caught on one of them and slipped inside. She tossed her clothes out of them and accidentally dropped her laptop, which she'd wrapped in her white grocery store this morning. I bought some teenager food. She reached the first step on the staircase and turned, which made him step back suddenly. Thank you, but I really am tired. He nodded. All right, tomorrow maybe. She went back to the bedroom and fell onto the bed. Mustiness exploded from the mattress. She stared at the ceiling. Moths had come in, attracted to the light, and they were hopping around the cobwebby chandelier. Her mother had grown up with a chandelier in her bedroom. This from the same woman who would lecture Emily if she left a light on in a room she wasn't using. She reached over and pulled some of her clothes from the floor and buried her face in them. They smelled familiar, like her mother's incense. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying not to cry. It was too early to say this was a bad decision, and even if it was, there was nothing she could do about it. She survived a year here. She could survive a year here, surely. She heard the wind skittering dry leaves around the balcony, something she realized sounded remarkably like someone walking around out there. She moved the clothes from her face and turned her head to look out the open balcony doors. The light from the bedroom illuminated the closest treetops in the backyard, but their limbs weren't swaying. She sat up and crawled off the bed. Once outside, she looked around carefully. Is anyone here? She called, not knowing what she would do if someone actually answered. Something suddenly caught her eye. She quickly stepped to the pole balustrade. Strad, weird word. She thought she saw something in the woodline beyond the gazebo in the overgrown backyard. There it was again. It was a bright white light, a quick zippy flash darting between the trees. Gradually the light faded, moving back into the darkness of the woods until it disappeared completely. Welcome to Lullaby in North Carolina, she thought, home of ghost lights, giants, and jewelry thieves. She turned to go back in and froze. There, on the old metal patio table, sitting on top of a layer of dried leaves, was her mother's charm bracelet where it hadn't been just moments ago. Okay, same chapter, but different voice. Too much wine. That's what Julia would blame it on. When she saw Stella in the morning, she would say, "Oh, and that thing I said about Sawyer last night, forget it. It was just the wine talking." As Julia made her way up to her apartment that evening, she felt vaguely panicked and not at all mellow, as summer wine on the back porch with Stella usually made her. She only had 6 months before she was free of this town again. 6 months that were supposed to be easy. The downhill slope of her 2-year plan. But with one tiny slip of the tongue, she just made things infinitely harder on herself. If what she said got back to Sawyer, he wouldn't let it rest. She knew him too well. She opened the door at the top of the staircase and stepped into the narrow hallway. Nothing had been done to the upper story of Stella's house to make it look like an apartment. There were 4 doors off the hallway. One led to the bathroom, one to Julia's bedroom, one to the second bedroom that had been converted into a kitchen, and another to a tiny third bedroom that Julia used as a living room. Years ago, after Stella's ex-husband had spent his way through Stella's trust fund, he decided they should bring in renters last week at Julia's restaurant. It was all anyone could talk